Arisman, did you off the video? Arisman?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Did you off the video? I can't see myself.
We don't turn off your video.
Oh dear, I cannot see myself.
Okay, let me check. Nabil, can you check Prof. Meli video?
Oh, there. Okay, I found
Okay.
it. I'm on. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. Today we have a webinar. The title is COVID-19 and Economic Crisis, Mitigating Impact and Sustaining Development in Asia. It's a joint collaboration between CSEAS, Center for Traditional Security Studies, NTU Singapore, with Center for Southeast Asian Studies Indonesia, with the support of of Non-Traditional Security in Asia, NTS Asia. Today, we will start our webinar. We would like to inform you about our webinar ground rules. All the Q&A will be only done through the chat box. All the Zoom participants must change their name into the following category, name and organization, so we can identify you by your organization. And then all the participants in YouTube also can write their question to the chat box in the YouTube. So the question from the YouTube as well as from the Zoom, I will select the most relevant question to be answered by the speakers. Okay, we would like to start this webinar by inviting Prof. Meli Caballero from RSIS NTU Singapore. I would like to give the time for her. Please, Prof. Meli, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Harisman. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or it could also be good morning, wherever you are, or maybe late evening. It is indeed a wonderful privilege and an honor for me on behalf of the NTS Center of RSIS to formally welcome you in this NTS Asia Consortium webinar on COVID-19 and its economic impact, looking at ways how to mitigate and at the same time sustain the developments that we have in the region. This afternoon, we're very happy to have the participation from the ASEAN Secretariat and the members of the NTS Asia Consortium. Before we begin, please allow me to just give you a very brief introduction of who we are, the NTS Asia Consortium. NTS stands for Non-Traditional Security, which looks at many issues that impact on the welfare and the security of states and societies. The NTS Asia Consortium is a regional network comprising 31 research institutions and think tanks across Asia. The consortium was first launched in January of 2007, and the NTS Center of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS here in NTU, leads this consortium and coordinates its secretariat. The members of the consortium are from the institutions in Northeast Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. The expansive membership is a very important component that allows us to have a close and a rich intra-regional collaboration, discussing and analyzing a range of NTS challenges facing our different regions. So this afternoon's webinar is a real manifestation of such collaboration. And the NTS Asia Consortium is indeed very, very happy that we have the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, or CSEAS, here in Indonesia, and led by Pa Arisman as the leader and as the convener of this meeting. We hope that the presentations that will be delivered by the members of the consortium and some invited guests will help us to understand the multifaceted impact of COVID-19 in different countries, and more especially how this has impacted many of the vulnerable communities. We know that although COVID-19 affects everyone, some segments of the society are disproportionately affected compared to others due to existing vulnerability and inequality in access to resources. We hope, therefore, that the exchanges that we can have this afternoon will help us to have a better understanding of how best we can understand the developments and help our fellow members of the community. We look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation, and I'm very happy when we learned that there are at least about 2,000 of us, of our audience joining us for this session. This number is really quite unthinkable if we were to have a physical meeting. So that is, I believe, an advantage of this new normal. So let me keep this brief, and I will now like to turn the floor or the microphone over to Pa Arisman. Thank you very much, and over to you, Pa.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Melly. Now we are moving to the keynote remarks from the ASEAN Secretariat. It should be from the SG of ASEAN Economic Community, Dr. Aladdin, represented by Dr. Julia. She's a director of ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate, ASEAN Secretariat. Ibu Julia, please, the time is yours. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Pak Arisman from the Central Southeast Asia Studies, Professor Melly from the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies, distinguished speakers, and ladies and gentlemen. It's really my Mr. Aladdin Rilo, and thank you very much for inviting the ASEAN Secretariat. Thank you to CSEAS, but also to the NTS Asia Consortium to this very important and very timely webinar as well. I think the most critical feature of this webinar, it's really the ability to bring together 3 different sub-regions of Asia. And this is actually very critical at this time and age, especially at this time of COVID-19, where we know that all of us are faced with these real unprecedented challenges with great uncertainties. None of us experienced this before, and the prompt sharing of experience and information has become one of the most important tools, if you like, in combating this pandemic. So for my remark, I will first start by focusing on how COVID-19 has in fact affected the region, focusing on ASEAN, and also how ASEAN as a region has responded to the crisis. I will then later on highlight a few key considerations that's important for the region in advancing our own recovery efforts. But I believe that these are not considerations that's just unique to Southeast Asia, but also to other regions as well. And I would look forward to much of the learning and the sharing of insights from this webinar. So we all know that this COVID-19, it's an unprecedented challenges. No one have seen this. We definitely never expected to come to this scale. As of yesterday, in ASEAN alone, we have about over 285,000 confirmed cases and over 7,600 confirmed deaths. If you represent that as a share of world total, that basically come up to 1.6% of global cases and 1.1% of global deaths. The comparative numbers for East Asia is about 0.8 and 0.9% respectively. And for South Asia, the number is about 13.5% and 7.2% respectively. Now, looking at all these statistics alone, it may seem that, well, ASEAN is doing relatively okay. But I believe that there's definitely no reason for complacency. Only last week, in fact, as we were basically finalizing one of our publications, the numbers were actually back then, just 1 week ago, was about 1.1 percentage point lower in terms of the share of global confirmed cases and global death. And within ASEAN as a region, we have likewise seen a wide variation. Just earlier on, a good number of ASEAN member states have appeared to have at least managed to contain the virus. But at least some of these countries now have starting to observe some surge in number of cases, raising the fear of a second wave. A few of us have not yet even managed to contain the virus, and we have seen the number of cases continuing to rise in some countries actually more significantly faster than the others. We also know that the COVID-19 is not just a global health crisis. It is also a socio-economic crisis. The IMF in June has projected that the global economy has come up with an even gloomier projection of 5.2% contraction in the baseline scenario, and as high as 8% if this pandemic is prolonged. For the Southeast Asian region, and this year. And this will be our first contraction since the Asian financial crisis. That's about 22, 23 years ago. And while at the moment the economy is expected to rebound to 5.2% by 2022, it will nowhere bring us to our pre-COVID growth track. But we also have to look beyond these macroeconomic statistics. As I think Professor Melanie has earlier said, the crisis has also impacted real people on the ground. The ILO has estimated that these travel and movement restrictions that's happening in the region actually saw a drop in the working hours in ASEAN by about 9.2%. This is the equivalent of a loss of about 26 million full-time equivalent workers. That is comparing second quarter of this year with the end of last year. And when you look at the sectors that are most affected, we know that our micro, small, and medium enterprises are among those that hit hardest. Our informal workers, there are about over 200 million of these in ASEAN, and they have their livelihood at almost immediate risk. You have sectors like travel, tourism, hospitality, accommodation, your basic food services. These are the sectors where women are actually overrepresented, and these are also the sectors where you would see actually hit hardest by this pandemic. And of course, you have your sectors like business services, manufacturing, and so on. All in all, it was estimated that over 41% of the workforce in ASEAN are actually in the hardest hit sectors. So they are most likely going to be adversely affected by the pandemic. And I think this is also perhaps one of the first time that we see an economic crisis, if you like, that is driven by a service sector contraction. So again, that's really bring in mind the multifaceted challenges that we are facing in the face of this pandemic. And the production side, you see global supply chains being significantly disrupted. At the beginning of this pandemic, where it was still relatively concentrated in East Asia, the fear then is mostly about the supply disruption. We are worried that our factories will have difficulty in sourcing inputs from China mainly. But then we see the virus spreading, and you see travel and movement restrictions imposed all over the world. And you realize that the difficulty has spread across sectors, across economies. And it's not just about inputs, but also about getting people to work at the factory and so on. And this has resulted in a loss of productive capacity, but equally so, a significant shock in demand as well. Definitely demand from the external market that we are supplying to, but increasingly also, as you have seen, our domestic demand, because purchasing power has now been affected because of the income and job losses, but also people are becoming more cautious as well in their own spending. Within the society, and I think Professor Mali has highlighted a very important point, the impact has been disproportionately harder on those that are most vulnerable. The women, the seniors, people with comorbidities, the shoulders, they call it, our children that are missing schools and education. The UN has just warned us of the risk of having a lost generation of children who are missing out on their education in the most critical years. You also have people in countries because of infrastructure or because of income, having no access to affordable quality internet connectivity. They are being denied of access to the digital technology that could have offset some of the productivity loss that they face from travel and movement restriction. All this are compounded to the risk of increasing further the inequality that we have within our society. Within ASEAN, individual ASEAN member states have responded at a speed and a scale that it is unprecedented. The immediate focus of everyone was to ensure macroeconomic stability, to ensure our financial market remains liquid, if you like, strengthening our health system response. We also provide targeted support to safeguard livelihood, especially to those that are more vulnerable. And increasingly, we see countries are now also looking at strategies for reopening, for living alongside the virus until such vaccine or treatment is found, but also on restarting the recovery. So what have ASEAN done as a region? I feel that the most important part of ASEAN work is its very early realization on the need and the commitment to work together in combating against this pandemic. And this is particularly important when you have many countries in the world whose immediate reaction might be to turn inward. Some, at least at the beginning, perhaps understandably so, because they are worried about curbing the spread of the disease and about securing domestic market of essential supplies. But later on, we would see that this is not really the right way to go. As early as 10th of March, just one day after the WHO declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic, the ASEAN economic ministers issued a statement committing to keep markets open and to ensure the continued flows of essential products. But the key is, how do you translate these commitments into concrete actions? ASEAN realized that to respond to this pandemic, it's not sufficient to just respond from the health sector alone. The establishment of the ASEAN Coordinating Council Working Group on Public Health Emergency, which is a cross-sectoral, cross-pillar. In ASEAN, when you talk about cross-pillar, it's about political security, economic, and socio-cultural pillars working together, was established. They held their first meeting on the 31st of March, and this body report directly to the ASEAN Coordinating Council, the second highest body in ASEAN after the ASEAN Summit. And this working group led the primary effort for ASEAN recovery. Across sectors, you see the same commitments being echoed, from food security, tourism, transport, energy, labor. And it's all about how do we coordinate measures to mitigate the impact on COVID-19, to work together as our economy slowly reopen, and to join efforts as well in working towards more robust recovery. At the most recent, on the 26th of July 2020, we hold the first ever regular ASEAN Summit. It was the 36th ASEAN Summit. And at this summit, our leaders make a number of announcements on very key ASEAN COVID-19 related initiatives. ASEAN has now established the COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund. We realize that response and efforts for COVID-19 is a very resource-intensive effort. We are also working towards establishing the regional reserve for emergency medical supply and the standard operating procedures for public health emergency. And the leaders also announced the commencement of the development of the ASEAN Comprehensive Post-Pandemic Framework and its accompanying action plan. Now, the recovery efforts obviously has to go beyond health. I think the pandemic has given us the lessons that beyond health, the impact has also touched upon economic, human security, and so on. It also has highlighted a number of mega trends, if you like digitalization and the need for greater sustainability and resilience that has been there on the agenda, but was not given the same level of urgency as it should. As ASEAN continue with this effort, it is very important for us to hear and learn also the experiences of other regions and also from global best practices. So something like this webinar is actually something that we really appreciate and would contribute towards our own reference and learning. And only last week, in fact, we organized a high-level dialogue with a panel from the World Bank, ADB, ESCAP, and WEF. And these are precisely to really see what other regions, what other institutions are doing. Now, in closing, I just want to part just with three key messages. First, the COVID-19 has obviously irreversibly transformed our world. I think we already realized that. And even after we have overcome the pandemic, it is unlikely that we will be going back to the old normal, if you like. The silver lining of this is that this gives all of us, not just ASEAN, but the world really, the unprecedented opportunity to change the way we do things for the better. We need to start looking at how can we better address the climate concern? How do we address inclusive growth? How do we strengthen social protection? And can we now actually give our essential services such as health or education the long overdue attention that they need. This should really now be on our priority agenda. Secondly, we know that the virus knows no boundaries. There is no country and no region that can win the fight against COVID-19 alone. And this make cooperation and collective efforts, in fact, more important now than ever. So for ASEAN, we will work collectively, not just among ourselves, but also with our stakeholders and our partners. Lastly, while we do not know exactly when this crisis will end, we do know that it will end. And it is important for ASEAN, and actually for any economy in any region, not to lose sight of its long-term vision. For ASEAN, this is really focusing on our community building and regional integration agenda. Reprioritization and recalibration may be necessary to an extent, but the vision of an integrated, prosperous, inclusive, and peaceful ASEAN community must be upheld. Implementation of existing commitments must be progressed. At the same time, we need to give greater urgency to some of the trends that has been further amplified during this crisis, particularly on digitalization, making it inclusive, and also in making sure that our growth and development is one that is inclusive, participatory, and leave no one behind. And with this, I thank the NTS Asia and the CSEAS again for organizing this seminar. And I wish you all a very successful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for your remarks. Yeah, I would like to highlight that our webinar, we hope that we get a comparative views from different members of NTS Asia, like mentioned by Julia and also by Melly, that the speakers coming from 3 different regions, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. So, and also we, maybe the difference between the previous high-level dialogue by Bu Mari Pangestu and Bu Amida UNSCAP. I think this one is we want to see how COVID-19 affected the vulnerable communities, especially the dilemma for the informal sector mentioned by Julia. They can be die by hunger or by virus is a very dilemma, right? So we want to know also in this webinar how Asian countries can help each other to managing this impact, especially sustaining the community development. I don't want to spend more time. I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers. We have distinguished speakers from East Asia, from Japan and Korea. From Japan is Professor Miki Honda from Hosei University. And then from South Korea, we have Dr. Jae-hyun Lee. He is from Asan Institute of Policy Studies, South Korea. And from the Southeast Asia, we have very prominent speakers, Professor Priyono. Before, he's a former Secretary for Vice President Republic of Indonesia during SBY. And he has experience in academic as a professor at the University of Indonesia, representing Indonesia. And from Southeast Asia, we also would like to learn from Vietnam, because Vietnam looks like very successful managing for the first wave of this COVID. So Hiap from Institute of South Asian Studies, Yusof Ishak Institute, will be representing Vietnam. And lastly, this is very important, General Dipankar from South Asia. India also, we know, is one of the most populous nations. So this is also how the challenge for India, Indonesia, the big country, managing this COVID impact to the economic sectors as well as the health sectors. I would like to call Professor Miki Honda to give her time to present. Please, Miki, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for kind introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Honda from Hosei University, Tokyo, Japan. I'm very pleased to talk about Japan's issues from the COVID-19 pandemic. And firstly, I quickly overview the current situation. And secondly, let me focus on the vulnerable population affected by the pandemic. And then let me introduce the responses of the domestic stakeholders. And finally, I try to make some recommendation on local, national, and global levels. Okay, this map shows updated infection status in Japan. Red areas are heavily infected. So most big cities like Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, and the Fukuoka and Hokkaido, we can find new infection cases in nightlife districts and the big cities. But an average positive rate nationwide is the same, at just 4%. Okay, next. So green bars show the number of positive in Tokyo. Red line shows the tendency every 7 weeks. So the increase in the number is due to the expansion of the PCR testing for young people working for bars, restaurants, clubs, and other night facilities. In Tokyo, the positive rate in the mid-April was about 32%, very high, and decreased to 2% in June, and now today at 6.5%. But this rate is less than that of Osaka and Nagoya. Okay, next. Now, one of the characteristics of the Japan case is low death rate per capita, just 2%. The many question about the lower death rate. The foreign media reports there may be some magic ingredients. The most say low rate owes much to Japanese health conscious and hygiene practices like washing hands frequently and wearing masks. The others say the Japanese do not have a culture of shaking hands or hugging each other. A medical expert suggests the virus attack in Japan is different type from the other in other nations. In those ways, there are various explanations, but undefined yet. But for us Japanese, we do not know how much the virus spread over, how many people are actually infected, because the government does not provide sufficient PCR tests, because the hospitals are not designed for treating infectious diseases patients. Therefore, many businesses, schools, and shops voluntarily close. We stay at home anyway. So people's voluntary self-restraint is a key to the low death rate. Next. How about the government response? Very late, I can say. Japan, as you may know, Japan is a very bureaucratic society and has vertical administrative structure. So every time some new incident happens, it takes long time to put a policy into practice. And there is no coordination between the 11 ministries. So due to the public poll conducted by the Kyoto News Agency, more than 75% of the national felt frustration about the late response of the administration. And consequently, the number of domestic bankruptcies and business disclosures are increasing. Then the cabinet prepared supplementary budget to provide relief packages. Okay, next. Despite the alarming trend, like other nations, Japan has restarted the business activities. The government lifted the state of emergencies, and the government looks to encourage the people to take a domestic trip to cater tourism demand. And to ready for the prolonged pandemic, the government proposed people to work in a remote or resort, the place. The workation, it's called workation. Okay, next. But the COVID outbreak hits vulnerable populations. In case of Japan, we do not face a situation like atrocity, but it's very serious situation we face. Single-parent families in lower living standards are most vulnerable. They live on annual income of 28,000 US dollar. So there are about 1.5 million households. especially their children in serious trouble. They are deprived of school meals. School meals is a precious resource of nutrition for such children. And also, the digital divide exists among students in Japan. Many students do not have Wi-Fi at home, and others do not have a PC, just have a mobile phone. So therefore, we have to pay attention to the such as students. Universities provide financial assistance with such students to lend Wi-Fi or buy PC, and faculty and alumni are asked to make a donation for such students. And Japanese non-regular workers, accounting for 40% of all workers, are facing unemployment or reduction of work hours. Unlike regular workers, they are not all protected by the law and are not able to receive unemployment insurance. And importantly, women are more represented in all these groups than men. Unemployment rate today is 6%. Usually we have 2.5, but today 6%. And due to the increase in unemployment rate, suicide cases are increasing in Japan. So media do not touch it because WHO has called on media in all countries to restrict their coverage of the suicide so as not to worsen the situation among those who are vulnerable. Okay, as for the migrant workers, there are about 3 million in Japan. Most are non-regular workers. They are losing job as an unpaid special leave without any social security. NGO can assist them in ordinary times, but NGO cannot afford to. NGO is suffering from a decrease in funds. The virus also put the squeeze on sick and injured people because they are losing access to medical treatment due to heavily restriction on outpatient visit to hospital. So COVID-19 survivors or recovered people, medical experts, and service workers and their families are exposed to the discrimination and prejudice. Okay, next. And let's see the responses to the vulnerable people. So on the local level, several municipalities provide benefits for single-parent household to ease the financial burden. And also some provide a box of foods and the necessary goods for infected people at home. And on the national level, a new center for foreign residents are established quite recently in order to give advices on employment, visas, law, and humanitarian issues. And also the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare updated information on assistance programs for the vulnerables. And the ministry plans to conduct its first nationwide coronavirus-linked mental health survey. Okay, next. And I try to find the strengths of that administration, but it's not easy. I cannot evaluate now, but unlike the US President Trump, never forgets to wear a mask and keeps on stressing the importance of wearing masks and washing hands to the public. It's very important as a national leader. It's very useful. But about weaknesses, I already pointed out like this way: the bureaucratic system, healthcare capacity, financial capacity, and also collaboration with the local governments, and too much relying on people's voluntary restraint. Okay, next. And lastly, I'd like to make some recommendations on the local level. Tokyo is expanding PCR testing to 10,000 per day, and will soon approve PCR tests using saliva instead of throat swab to slash testing times to 1 hour from the current 6 hours. This policy will result in the increasing number of infections temporarily. Therefore, at the same time, not to knock down the healthcare system, local governments need to strengthen the function of public health centers by securing beds for mild patients and increasing the number of nurses and other staffers. And on the national level, like Korea, I hope next speaker, Dr. Lee, will explain about this. Carry out PCR tests to protect healthcare system other than shutting schools, business once again. And the government needs to stop distinguish between regular and non-regular workers. The government needs to provide some rewards like tax incentives with the companies hiring laid-off workers, because the companies do not have to protect all their workers during severe economic downturns. So losing job means not just losing income, it also means losing one's dignity as a member of the society. And therefore, it's up to the government to provide ongoing support for them. Yeah, next. On the global level, WHO should provide unified notification, direction, and instruction, and also I'd like to ask it to coordinate vaccine development. Okay, the battle against the pandemic is far from over. Everyone has an important role to play in preventing the spread. It's paying more attention to our daily behaviors. Okay, I'm stopping here. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your question and comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. Yeah, now we move to South Korea, from Japan to South Korea. Please, Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much having me. I thank NTS Asia, RSIS, and CSEAS, right? Okay. Right. Today I'm going to tell you some South Korean experience and the Korean society, those who are mostly affected by the COVID-19 in Korean society, and what we have to do together, the regional countries, to overcome this kind of crisis. I've got 4 different topics here, and first I will introduce the current COVID-19 situation in South Korea, just briefly. And then
you want to share your PowerPoint?
Oh, sorry.
No,
sorry, I forgot to share my slide.
Sorry.
Terribly sorry for that. Right. Yeah, sometimes cause the technology causes some trouble. Anyway, will first tell you the current COVID-19 situation in South Korea just briefly, and then move on to economic impact that the COVID-19 had on South Korea, and what was the government response against this pandemic. And the third topic is who are the vulnerable sections of South Korean society, and what was the difficulties they had. And the last, how can we work together to overcome this regional and even global pandemics? I will show you some graph. I got this from the Worldometer, and it shows that the South Korea was quite successful in controlling the COVID-19 cases. This shows a little bit the early sort of a situation. In July 11, we had 1,300 people got the infected, and then the daily new cases, as you can see, in the late February and early March, we had kind of explosion. And then from the mid-March to April, the storm is weathered, and we have a quite a clean and flat curve here. today we have between 30 to even 1-digit new cases daily. And this shows the current number of people infected in South Korea. Overall, I believe the South Korean government has done a quite job. South Korean government and society in general has done a quite a good job in curbing the COVID-19 cases in South Korea. But still, we cannot escape from the economic crisis, if you like. And last year, South Korea achieved 2.0% GDP growth. And this year, IMF predicts that the South Korean GDP growth will be minus 1.2. This is the first time in the past 22 years that South Korea had this negative growth. But still, minus 1.2 is much better than the South Korean experience during the Asian financial crisis, when we had minus 5.1 negative economic growth at that time. And still, even if South Korean economy grows just grows minus 1.2, we are doing quite well among OECD countries, as you can see in this table. And the second economic impact, across the industry, the industrial production in April this year, we recorded minus 5.0% growth, which is actually contraction. And as you can see, in the service industry was the most severely hit by the pandemic. It recorded minus 6.1% production growth in April. And this is the service industry is also the where most of the temporary workers find their jobs. So it shows that the temporary workers in South Korea is the most severely hit among all different jobs. And also we had a big impact, a substantial impact on export and import, minus 25%, minus 15%, and also the employment. In terms of employment rate, it's not that bad, 3.8%, but actually 1.6 million people lost a job in March alone. And this is the biggest record since 1982. And what was the government response against this economic crisis? South Korean government announced the 3 different stimulus packages in March, April, and July. As you can see, in the first case, the government announced 9.7 billion US dollars and 10 billion US dollars and 30 billion US dollars. The focus was on COVID-19 responses and employment, MSMEs, and boosting consumption. These are the focus area of the government stimulus package. And we also had some programs to support those vulnerable people, and the programs to promote domestic consumption, like emergency disaster relief fund. The central government as well as the local government distributed some money actually to people to boost consumption. And there was also the program for the temporary workers, self-employed freelancers and low-income families. And the government also provided employment stabilization funding to employers, to companies, to keep the job or even to create jobs. And there is also the debate going on in South Korea on the universal basic income, which means that actually government distribute money to the people as a basic income. And with this, as you can see, the third stimulus package in July, the government also announced this what I call Korean New Deal. It's basically based on the idea how to strengthen employment security, and the government tried to build 2 pillars like Green New Deal and Digital New Deal. This is not just to overcome the economic impact by the COVID-19 crisis, but to upgrade the South Korean economy in general. I don't have time to go through all these details of the Korean New Deal. Okay, now I move on to the vulnerable communities in South Korea. The first, I got two. The first is temporary workers, and the second is migrant people. The temporary workers, by definition, it is a group of people who are employed less than a year on contract basis. We have a 7.1 million such kind of workers in South Korea. Most of them are employed in service industries like leisure, hospitality, education service, wholesale and retail. As you can see the table below, these industry were hit by the COVID-19 crisis, and it produced a lot of unemployment in those industries. And these temporary workers are the first to be retrenched when we have economic crisis. And so far in March, only 719,000 people lost their job, and this is the biggest since 1998. And it includes 290,000 women and 240,000 youth. And the second group is migrant people. In South Korea, we have 2.5 million migrant people, including 390,000 undocumented workers, migrant people. And also we have 125,000 marriage migrants from all over the world. Of course, South Korean government provide free testing and free treatment when they are found infected. But the disadvantage that this group has got is largely from the access to the information and the financial assistance by the government. The Korean people get the information from this portal, COVID-19 portal by the Korean government, but it has got only Korean, English, and Chinese section. And the depth of information is different between Korean and other languages. There's an access issue by the migrant workers and undocumented migrants. First, do they have internet access? And second, do they have access to the information in Korean, English, or Chinese? Most of the people not from the English-speaking or Chinese-speaking countries, they don't speak or can understand this Korean, English, and Chinese information. And second, these people are excluded from the government financial assistance. And even they are sometimes excluded from the public face mask supply controlled by the government. That's the problem. And the last, how can we put our hands together to overcome this COVID-19 crisis? I got 3 recommendations here. The first, we have to check our posture, national and regional posture against the pandemic. First, do we have adequate information sharing mechanism? Do we have a government to government or emergency organization to emergency agencies hotlines across the region? We have to check this. And second, do we have a regional standard for information transparency when we are hit by another pandemic? We have to check this too. And the second, do we have a region-wide standard procedure and measures? If we have a standard procedures for the whole region, we can have a better coordination when we are hit by the pandemics. And this standard procedures, standard measures should be for protection and treatment, information sharing, information provision, and also for financial assistance to the vulnerable people. And we don't need rules or the binding treaty among the regional governments. What we just need is kind of a declaration, political commitment. I still believe that even the declaration and political commitment is better than nothing. And the last economic mutual assistance, in this region, the economic crisis or other type of crisis prompts and promotes cooperation, as we had seen in the ASEAN Plus 3 experience. We have to discuss more travel bubbles between the countries in this region to revive a regional value chain. And the last but not the least, we have to revitalize regional trade. We have bilateral and also multilateral mechanisms like RCEP and CPTPP. We have to fully utilize these mechanisms. Okay, I spent 2 and 30 seconds more. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Now, from East Asia, we move to Southeast Asia. These two countries is also interesting because Indonesia with a huge of population, and if I'm not mistaken, almost now more than 100,000 cases already informed by the government. So, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, Philippines as well. Maybe Pak Priyono from Indonesia will share with us what is the current condition of COVID-19 and the impact of the COVID-19 to Indonesia. Please, Pak Priyono, please, the time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Risman. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor and privilege for me to speak before this very, very important forum. Let me start with, I'm actually already tired with all this webinar talking about the COVID and the economic crisis, because it seems all are a bad news. There is no good news that I heard. This morning, I heard that Indonesia growth will be contracted, -5, while 2 months ago, the Minister of Finance still believe that we will have the 0 growth this year. But nowadays, it's already realized that we have a contracted. Yesterday, when there is a webinar with all economists under the Indonesian Economists Association, they talk that China, maybe someone can correct me later on, have the very, very, what you call it, bad policy for international trade. They stop exporting and they stop importing. It means that they will use everything just only for internal matters. That will be affect a lot of country later on. And just yesterday also, I heard that some of the big hotels in Jakarta will operate just only half or 1/3 of their capacity. So all is about the bad thing, all about the something that actually we don't want to hear, but we have to hear it because of this COVID and so. Let me start with the presentations. The presentation is held by staff of Arisman in the CSEAS, but I will talk about this one. Okay, the first one is unprecedented crisis, because we never have this crisis before. We have a economic crisis, monetary and economic crisis in the 1997 and 1998. But it's just economic, not the health crisis. But now we have the combine between the health crisis and the economic crisis. Okay, next. Again, this one. So it's becoming worsening crisis because of these two crises come together, and we don't have any experience before. When people talk about new normal actually is for the economic crisis. There is no something for the health crisis actually. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Now, this is the global economic prospect. You can hear it already from the two developed countries. Okay, next. This is the health shocks, which is with the economic crisis and upending the livelihoods, which already vulnerable groups. Everybody talk about vulnerable groups actually. Okay, next. This is what I want to talk about. Impact of the COVID-19 on the individuals and households. So I really wanted to talk about the impact of this crisis to the society. If the to economic, many people already talk about that one. Many people already says about the bad thing that economic will be goes down, contracting and everything. So there is impact on the labor income. So the people who has the income from the work. Okay, this is workers. Okay, now this one is for the this one for the labor. This is for the non-labor income. Remittance. We are talking about the people who migrate to other countries. Japan and Korea is the receiving countries, but Indonesia and Philippines is the sending countries. So because we are sending the people going work abroad, we have remittance. I heard it also from the webinar yesterday with fellow economists that no remittance is just only 1/3 of the usually we got it. Before, the people in the rural area mostly got money from the remittance because their family goes abroad for work. But because of this crisis, remittance is become less and less. Okay, and also this one, also the problem in the household. So, suspension of classes and feeding program in school. This is the most important one, actually, especially for the early childhood. Early childhood, no, they are doing the classes through the online also. While, some good behavior cannot be teach by online. They should be teach by the actual one, how to cross the street, how to go in line when you want to send a letter and everything. It should be done by actual, not by virtual. Cannot be. So that's the most difficult impact that we will have it. Okay, next please. Again, in the individuals and households, changes in the prices and shortage of the basic consumption goods for the essential one. And then the rise of the out of pocket. So we have a loss of income, actually, loss of wealth, loss of money, which is because of this one, this crisis. Inflation pressure, maybe inflation is not become so problem for us. Next. Impacts of COVID on welfare. You can see it this one, the from this one. That's the welfare will be go down because of this COVID. Next, please. Oh, this is the good news. Maybe people have to learn about this one. The country who has the leader, who has the female leader, become very good in coping this crisis. They have a lot of ways, to avoid the crisis in their own country. Okay, so we have two, at least two example from the New Zealand and Denmark. Next, please. The Taiwan, you know, Taiwan is very, very good in coping the crisis. They have almost not experienced the crisis like the other countries close to them. Finland also the same thing. This is, we will ask why the female leaders more, you know, adapt to this crisis. Why they can give very good what you call it policies in coping the crisis compare with the male leaders. I don't want to talk about the USA. You know, USA is very unique. Okay. Okay. Next, please. Confirmed deaths of COVID in selected countries. It's already people knows about this one. Deaths is rising every day. Okay. Next, please. This is the economy impact. Even though I actually rather reluctant to talk about this one, but as an economist, we have to do this one also. The reducing the production capacity, restriction of the working, and then this one, the quantity of jobs. We have the rise of unemployment. Actually, this is which is very, very important one. There will be a lot of forces and unemployment in Indonesia because of this COVID. Some business doesn't work anymore. You know, for example, the people working in the tourism business, tours and travels, they have to stop activities. So their worker is unemployed right now. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. This one. No. Next, please. This one is actually happen in the every country in the world. So just go ahead. Next, please. Employment losses are rising. Okay, go ahead. Beyond employment work at risk. This is all the bad news actually. Let me have the good news. Okay, next please. Next please. This one is done by the government. Yeah, expansion of the unemployment benefits, which is given by the government, with subsidies. Government do it like that. Offering companies incentive, tax holiday, you know, reducing tax and everything, unemployment service to complement income support, you know, all this one need the money. This is also the problem why economic contraction going on right now, because we have to do all this one to protect, you know, the people who got the consequences from this crisis. Okay, go ahead. Next, please. Coordination. It's always, people always talk about the coordination. It's easily to talk about coordination, but sometimes it's difficult to practice because, you know, sometimes the every ministry, they have their own problems. So to coordinate one ministry and the other ministry is difficult. In this 3 months, already twice the president very angry in the cabinet meeting because coordination is very weak right now. Actually, coordination is weak during the crisis, but weaker because of the crisis. Okay. This one, the good news. I like this one. Pandemic and the new job. There will be so many new job opens because of this crisis, because of this pandemic. Teleconference support specialties. This one is one of the new job right now. Everybody talk about webinar. Every day there is a webinar and everything. Second, online market. Now we have so many people, doing the shopping through the online. So this is also the good one, even though there is also negative aspect. Sometimes the one that you wanted is not like what is advertised in this one. And then this one, temperature screeners, of course, because when you go to the mall, when you go to the other buildings, there is a screening. Screen manufacturers and installers. This also the job that's open during pandemic. Next, please. Pandemic and work from home. This is very important because now the women have three functions right now. Before, women sometimes, especially women who doesn't work, just only have housework. They are working for doing the housework. But now, because of the pandemic, they have three works actually. One is working from home, if they are working. Second is doing the housekeeping. The third one is this one is very difficult for them. Become a teacher, because all their kid doesn't go to the schools. They have to study at home. So the mother has to accompany the kids to study. So they become the teacher, even though actually, they sometimes they complain about that one because they are not trained as a teacher, but now they have to be a teacher. So now women have three functions: working to get a salary, keeping the housework, and the last one is helping their children. Very, very unique, which is in the analysis before. I mean, the scientific analysis, they never knows that it can be like this. Okay, next please. Pandemic and family time, because they are always at home, so they can play together, they can talk together, keep communicating each other, draw the list of family rules together. So the social capital becoming one of the positive aspect of this pandemic, because of the people stay at home, so they're close together, they becoming a real family, not the family which sometimes we watch in the television, watch in the movie, in the television and everything, which is sometimes is not close each other. Father, mother, and children, sometimes they work together, as you see in the picture. Actually, you see in the picture, they play together, they work together, mother helping the kid. So that's the positive aspect of the pandemic, even though I'm not saying that we have to have all the pandemic all the day or something like that, but this is the positive aspect. Next please. Oh yeah, thank you. So while we are talking mostly about the negative aspect, the bad news about pandemic, there are several also positive aspect and also the good news for that one. Especially if you talk about the family, especially if you talk about the closeness, togetherness and everything. We call it this one, social capital. We build a social capital in the society because of this pandemic. But I'm hoping also this pandemic will end very soon when we have the vaccine for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Priyono. Now we are going to Vietnam here. I'm also curious how Vietnam dealing with the pandemic, with the COVID-19, especially in the first wave. Please, here.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. Thanks to Arisman and Prof for inviting me to this webinar. I'm here to present the case of Vietnam, how Vietnam has dealt with COVID-19 and what are the impacts of COVID-19 on Vietnam socially and economically. I have only 10 minutes to go through about 8 slides, so I will try to be as brief as possible. So here you can see the, sorry, can you go to the first slides? Yeah. Next, please. So here you can see the timeline of major events regarding COVID-19 in Vietnam. Basically, the first case identified in Vietnam was on the 23rd January. And from then until April, Vietnam had a total of more than 300 cases. And in April, Vietnam imposed 3 weeks of social distancing, basically lockdown. And since April 23rd until July 25th, Vietnam had no community case. So basically 99 days of no community transmission. And that helped a lot for Vietnam's economy to recover. But from the 25th of July until now, there has been a second wave of infections starting from Da Nang in central Vietnam. And this is more serious. And so far, Vietnam has 286 active cases. And in total, we have 672 cases so far. And why in the first wave there was no death? In the second wave, over the past week, there have been 8 deaths. So there's something quite serious. And now it depends on whether Vietnam can successfully contain the second wave. Then we can know how Vietnam's economy will weather through the crisis. In the first over the past 6 months or so, Vietnam has introduced some support measures, including the SPV cutting policy rate by 1.5%, and the government also offered some allowances for vulnerable families, vulnerable workers, and commercial banks under this instruction of the State Bank of Vietnam also offered some interest rate reduction for eligible businesses. So far, Vietnam's economy has remained rather resilient. You can see here on the slides here. In terms of economic growth, before I go into the data here, I would like to acknowledge that most of the data I draw here I draw from a recently released report by the World Bank in Vietnam titled "What Will Be the New Normal for Vietnam?" So if you are interested to find out more about the impact on Vietnam, you can go to Google and look up this report. I think it's a very useful resource. Here you can see the charts showing that Vietnam's GDP has been hard hit by COVID-19. Why the average annual growth rate of GDP over the past few years is in the range of 6 to 7%. The first 6 months is really bad for Vietnam with the average, the annualized growth rate of only 1.8%. And in the second quarter, the growth rate went down to only 0.36%. It is the lowest quarterly growth rate of Vietnam for the past 20 or 30 years. This is mainly because of the service, the service sector being impacted seriously by the COVID-19, especially the tourism industry. Last year, Vietnam had received 18 million international tourists. So far, this number is going down significantly, and I think this year Vietnam is hardly able to receive maybe 3 million. So the impact on this tourism sector is significant, and other services industries like transportation, hotel, transportation also significantly impacted by COVID-19. So this has weighed down on GDP growth over the past 6 months. In terms of export, you can see here the demand for Vietnam's exports is going down, and also in industrial production is also going down because of lower demand. In terms of inflation, also, although the headline inflation is not that bad, about 2 to 3%, food price has surged dramatically, mainly because of the increasing price of pork in Vietnam. Another major impact is in terms of credit expansion. Over the past few years, credit expansion in Vietnam is significant, is quite high, about 15 to 20%. But this year, because of slowing businesses, many businesses are closing down. Credit expansion is not as significant as previous years, around 7 or 8%. And another important impact is on the tax revenue. You can see here on the chart, tax revenue collected by the government is decreasing by 30 to 33%, and in June it went down by 22%. So that means that in the future, Vietnam will face more fiscal difficulties, and the national debt will go up, and that will somehow cause negative impact on Vietnam's macroeconomic conditions. Next, please. For the external sector, Vietnam's international reserve is increasing. This is something positive, mainly because of the steady inflow of foreign investment, and also Vietnam's quite a strong export performance that helps Vietnam collect more hard currency. Another positive factor is Vietnam's rather stable exchange rate for its currency, the dong. You can see here, although there was a few months when the currency was weakened, but over on average, Vietnam's dong is performing quite well, and the exchange rate of the currency against the major currencies, especially the US dollars, is quite good. It remains quite stable, and this is something significant if we compare the dong with some currencies in the region, including the Singapore dollar. Here in Singapore, the Singapore dollar is also weakening significantly against the US dollar, about 3 to 4% over the past few months. Next, please. As I mentioned, exports was quite stable, but the export performance is not as good as previous years. You can see here on the chart, most export items are going down in terms of value and also volume as well. The exceptions are computers, parts, and rice. I think this can be explained by the increasing demand for computer, because many people are now working from home, so they need to upgrade or buy new computers. In terms of markets, export markets, we can see that most markets are importing less from Vietnam except for China and the US and Korea as well. These are still important markets for Vietnam, which are importing more from Vietnam. On the import side, we can see that most items also going down. Vietnam are importing less from other countries. It is because of the lower demand inside the country. In terms of FDI, foreign direct investment, we can see that over the past 6 months, in the first half of 2020, foreign investment is still there, but it's significantly lower than the second half of 2019. And this is something notable because, over the past 1 or 2 years, many companies are moving their or shifting or diversifying their many manufacturing facilities beyond China, and Vietnam is said to be one of the countries that may benefit from this trend. But actually, we can see that perhaps COVID-19 has made it more difficult for them to move, their facilities to other countries, including Vietnam. So, although investment is still there, foreign investment is still there, still significant, but it is not as good as many people expected. Next, please. So those are the economic impacts. What about social impacts? So there have been a few surveys so far, and there was one done by Ipsos, which is a consultancy firm, and they found that 90% of Vietnamese people had low income because of COVID-19. Here on the screen, you can see another survey which is more positive, more optimistic. This is done by the World Bank and the General Statistics Office of Vietnam, and their findings are more encouraging, more positive to some extent. And it should be noted that this survey was done before the second outbreak recently. And in this survey, they found that the situation is quite bad, but not too serious so far. And this is mainly thanks to Vietnam's early containment of the virus. Specifically, they find that while most households have been affected by the COVID crisis, the negative impact has been decreasing over time. For example, about 5% of households experience a reduction in income at one point in time since February, but only 70% of people were affected negatively by a shock over the past month. That's in June, when the economy has reopened. And secondly, they find that there's higher income loss for family businesses than for wage workers. So specifically, about 32% of family businesses have reported low income in June compared to February, but only 13% of heads of households who are wage earners had a lower income in June than in February. So only 13%. This is quite something quite encouraging. But the conclusion is that the impact may be temporary because only 2.3% of heads of households who worked in February were not working in June. So the number of unemployed people are not too high. So among those still employed in wage jobs, 92% were working normally and with full normal payment by June. So the loss in income is not that bad. And only 4.3% of family businesses had closed temporarily or permanently. So compared with the situation in some other countries, including in this region, we can see that the impact of COVID-19 on Vietnam is not too serious, and this is mainly thanks to Vietnam's early containment of the virus. But now with the second outbreak over the past 2 weeks, there are more uncertainties, and it all depends on how well Vietnam can contain the second outbreak. And August may be the decisive time, a critical time to know whether Vietnam can emerge from the second outbreak successfully. But nevertheless, even with the early successful containment of the first wave, there was some impact on especially the inequality among the population. For example, temporary workers, immigrants workers are also losing their income. Many factories by foreign investors, especially in the garment, footwear sector, for example, mass firing their workers, and many people are unemployed or having their wage or salary cut. And in terms of education, for example, in April, Vietnam imposed 3 weeks of social distancing, but before that, schools had been closed for some time. I think in total, schools were closed for 3 months, more than 3 months. And that means many children in the rural areas or in poor family, they cannot get access to education, because during this time, many schools had online sessions, and those poor family or people or kids in the rural area, they don't have access to computer or the internet. That also constrain their access to education. And of course, Vietnam has been very successful in terms of poverty reduction. But with this crisis, many people are going back to poverty. That is something worrying in the long run. If the crisis prolongs, Vietnam's achievement in poverty reduction may be reversed. There are some other social problems, like, as I mentioned, increasing unemployment, and especially in urban areas, there have been signs that the crime rates are going up. Recently, for example, former business owner and another man, robbed a bank in Hanoi, mainly because of difficulties in his business. So if the situation gets worse, or the crisis prolongs, we can expect more crimes in the future. So here, next slide, please. Yeah, here's my conclusion. Basically, Vietnam's economy remains rather resilient thanks to the early containment of the first wave. So the Vietnamese government can take credit for this. But now what we have to wait and see is whether Vietnam can get out of the second wave successfully. And we can know the answer by the end of this month when we have more data. By now, the number of cases is going down, but we have to wait and see at least 2 more weeks to know whether Vietnam can get out of the second wave successfully. Social impacts, as I mentioned, not too serious, but also worrying. And this is particularly the case if the second wave is not contained. In Vietnam, maybe the informal economy may help a bit and make it less worse, less the impact less serious, for the majority of the people who are unemployed, because they may quickly find an informal job sometime in the future. The informal economy is still play an important part in Vietnam's economic life. So this may help in the long run as well. Looking forward, we can expect slowed GDP growth. I think even if Vietnam can get out of the second wave successfully, Vietnam cannot register a GDP growth rate of more than 3% this year. But anyway, to have a positive growth rate is already a success, compared with other countries in the region. In the near future, Vietnam may experience some fiscal difficulties, as I mentioned, and especially in the banking system, bad debt may be mounting. We have signs of mounting bad debt already, because consumer credits, consumer loans, and also corporate loans are becoming bad debts already. Constrained exports, of course, the low demand in most countries around the world is also having some impact on Vietnam's export performance this year. Investment and tourism, investment is still there, but as I mentioned, is going down. And tourism, of course, this is the major area of damage for Vietnam. And I don't think tourism may rebound this year. Of course, next year may be better, but I think it's still much worse than pre-COVID-19. But if we look at the big picture, I think that Vietnam is still performing better than most countries in the region and in the world as well. And this point to the importance of efforts to contain the virus. If countries are able to contain the virus early and successfully, they stand a better chance of recovering economically more quickly. And that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you here. Yeah, now we're going to South Asia. Dipankar, please, your time to share with us. Please, Dipankar, General Dipankar.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening,
Evening.
friends, but definitely not good night.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a presentation on behalf of South Asia, capturing the characteristics that are developing in 8 countries of the South Asian region. Now, it's a pleasure to be here once again. I think just about 2.5 years or so, we had a wonderful meeting of the group under mainly at Bali under the CSIS, and that was addressing issues of comprehensive development under the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals. Now here, we have been impacted today suddenly by one of the principal black swan events of the world, an event which takes place perhaps once in 100 years or perhaps in a millennia. And this is one impact of this COVID-19 pandemic that we around the world will have to confront and deal with effectively. It is a game changer. It introduces very fundamental changes in global power balance, world order, development, peace, and security as we know it around the world. I'm going to make a brief presentation on behalf of South Asia, which of course includes 1/4 of the world's population, encompassing 8 countries in the region. And if you look at the figures next, can you see the next slide, please? Now, this slide shows the month of July impact of the confirmed cases as well as deaths in the South Asian region. Now here you will see that the numbers now during this month have gone very distinctly high all across this region. And if I'm not entirely wrong, perhaps it was just yesterday that India's last 24-hour incident of the induction of the infection was the largest in the world, more than that of the USA. Now, this is a figure that neither is India proud about or not something that we were looking forward to it. But nevertheless, this is the sudden spread of this coronavirus 19 that is now spreading in South Asia. Though from these figures, you will see that the incidence as well as the deaths from the coronavirus is the highest in India. But with Pakistan and Bangladesh also, the numbers are growing very fast. And if you look at the per capita, or perhaps say per million incidents of the disease, the infection, or of deaths, Pakistan and Bangladesh will probably be even higher than India. Now, in this, you will also see that there are 8 countries in South Asia. In the first 4 countries, the incidents are extremely high. And the next 4 countries, because of the small populations and also their comparative isolation, you will see the numbers are comparatively less. And so therefore, it provides a very mixed picture across the region. But the fact is that all countries in South Asia have been involved very adversely by the COVID-19, and the ways of coming out of this pandemic situation will challenge all the countries equally. And it is in this context that I'd like to say that the thrust of my presentation is to highlight the sub-regional, regional, and the inter-regional cooperation that can address the problems of the pandemics. Next slide. The socio-economic impact of the coronavirus has really been a major impact on South Asia. The international trade and tourism has collapsed, and countries such as the Maldives and Sri Lanka uh, and Nepal, dependent on tourism for a large part of the GDP, have been impacted badly. The wage and income has been wiped out for tens of millions of people across South Asia. There's a possibility of food insecurity in the future, though I must add here that Indian food stock reserve is sufficient to look after the whole region for at least a period of 1 to 2 years. But nevertheless, as a consequence of these developments, the social inequalities will widen across the region. And therefore, the urgent needs that confront the region is to ensure the inclusive and sustainable relief and effective stimulus all across the countries of South Asia. The next is the strengthening of public health infrastructure. Now, I must add here, if you were to look at, say, the CNN or any Western media and see in an evening comments by experts on the coronavirus or the epidemiologies, you will see that 20% of those top experts in the world are from South Asian region, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and perhaps a little more from India. Yet, in the South Asian region, the experts are comparatively less. It is this movement of our so-called experts and specialists, the best in the world, for better economic prospects to the West that once again deprive the region of effective policy formulation and health treatment. Second aspect is strengthening the public health infrastructure. Now, this is extremely important. We have to address this very seriously. And finally, enhance social protection and livelihood security. Now, that is an essential imperative for all of South Asia. Next. Very briefly, I don't want to go into the details of this particular chart. It shows the sustainability of the economies of all countries in South Asia. Unfortunately, all South Asian economies will be very badly impacted by the coronavirus and will suffer a GDP loss of between 1 to 8%. Next. Now, the impact on the socio-economic activities would be, as I said, collapse of travel and tourism, the product offtake from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., manufactured ready garments, orders to be placed for the next year have all been badly affected. Manufacturing industries have been hit, and then movement of migrant workers, both within a country, especially in India, where this was not anticipated very well by the government, has led to a serious and very severe adverse economic impact. And also, the return of global migrant labor, whether from Nepal or Bangladesh, from West Asia or elsewhere, or students from China, had been brought back to South Asia, required a major and a massive effort. But this was sustained, a lot of it by India itself, on its capabilities. But as a consequence, we're likely to see a much slower recovery due to inadequate personal spending within South Asia, which is, of course, a characteristic elsewhere in Asia as well. So, whether the economic growth path will change on the pattern of a V, that sharp downturn and a sharp upturn, or a L, that is a sharp downturn and then a plateau for a long time, or a U is up in the open. We don't really know as to what sort of an economic upturn can be expected in the near future. Primarily, of course, this will depend on the nature of the vaccine that emerges and also its availability around the world and particularly in South Asia, which will become an international problem around the world. Of course, South Asia in that context has some capabilities. India is a source of the manufacture of enormous quantities of medicines around the world and one of the largest sources of manufacture. And so therefore, we are likely to see some uptake regarding that. Next. Next. But this calls for much greater cooperation within the South Asian region. It has to be within all the existing frameworks of cooperation. Many of these are not functioning at an optimal level because of the various geopolitical factors involved. South Asian regional cooperation and cooperation between South Asia and Southeast Asia at a much lower levels of efficiency. Now, this has to change very dramatically. I've identified some of these issues. I will not dwell into each of these. Some of these are functioning. The Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal sub-regional cooperation arrangement has begun to take off and is beginning to link this region in economic cooperation. But in the larger context of the South Asian Free Trade Agreement or the BIMSTEC, which brings South Asia in partnership with Myanmar and Thailand, these are not showing as much progress and development as is required, as is essential for an economic takeoff for the region. Next. Yes. Interregional cooperation. Now, the Pandemic Cooperation Network under the ESCAP in Bangkok is making enormous progress. And they've come out with detailed analysis and studies on steps and measures that have to be undertaken in the region. Now, it's a political challenge for all national leaders to adopt many of these measures and to bring them about and make them happen early. The fundamental concept, I think, in this building back, and of course, one has to accept that just as a pandemic affects in a very major way and distorts the systems and structures enormously, it also provides an opportunity of what has been defined as build back better. So whatever we build now together in cooperation with each other must be a distinct improvement of what it was in the past, and therefore the potential of this must improve and be substantially better. Last slide. Next. So therefore, in conclusion, I'd like to say that protecting people and enhancing resilience within the states of South Asia is the primary concern of all the people as well as their leadership. It has to sustain an inclusive economic recovery across the board, between nations and within a nation, across all levels of society. And finally, internationally, to restore the supply chains and support the medium-scale industries, which are the engines of employment and development. So once again, finally, it'll require and call for a collective and joint front against a common enemy, that is the coronavirus epidemic that confronts us today. Last word, I would like to compliment the dynamic leadership of Meli in order to, once again, revive the whole process of non-traditional security cooperation across Asia. Because finally, let us accept that it is through this cooperative and conjoint leadership of all countries in Asia that we will overcome the disastrous consequences of this pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dipankar. Yeah, looks like based on the schedule, we should finish 4 p.m. But now we still have 15 minutes more. But I don't know if you agree, we can extend a bit, like 10 minutes, but I would like to circulate the question by this first round because there's so many questions from YouTube and Zoom. I would like to summarize by each speakers. Like I would like to start for Mickey. For Mickey, there's a question from RSIS from Margaret.
Margaret, okay.
The question is from Margaret is, per view, are Japan protection measures sufficient in terms of budget allocation, disbursement, efficiency, and inclusivity in helping vulnerable communities? Did they reach the risk target group? Anything can be improved? It's too fast?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Margaret. Japan's protection measure is not enough, of course, not enough. And the government, as for the money, more the better, right? So the government, central government, and also the local government are preparing for providing another subsidies, and in the coming couple of months, they are preparing now. Then also they are planning to provide subsidies for the person in the service industries. And also economic analysts propose consumption tax. We have the 10% consumption tax now, but analysts propose to abolish the consumption tax for the time being to help household. I think this will give some impact. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mickey. Now the question for Dr. Lee from South Korea. I would like to summarize the question. Actually, the first question is how South Korea manage the issue of unemployment because of COVID-19. This is from Brawijaya University in Indonesia. And then the second question is about how South Korea government also support SME to keep economic running. So the first is unemployment. The second is about SME, small medium enterprise. Please, Lee John, Dr. Lee, please. Yeah.
This is not an easy question to answer because I'm not an economist and I don't know the details of the Korean government to boost South Korean economy during the COVID-19 crisis. And I believe the government has done a quite good job to reduce the unemployment. And in my presentation, I showed you some kind of measures like providing some support for the unemployed people and providing some financial support for the employers, for the companies to keep the job or even to create a job. That is what the government can do. But of course, given the magnitude of the COVID-19 crisis, the government can nothing could be enough to save the people, save the economy, and to get this whole society back to the pre-COVID-19 situation. But anyway, the government has to amass all the resources it has to support the people. And on the second question, I don't really know the details of the government policy, but instead, I would like to answer the question by Margaret posted on our chatting room. And her question was quite interesting and it made me think a lot of things about the Korean society. The question was, what was South Korea's resilience in this situation? And I was wondering what are the South Korea's resilience? And if I look back the whole COVID-19 situation in South Korea, first, in terms of the instrument, the ICT was quite well deployed to fight against COVID-19. in testing, checking, and sharing information, and developing apps and give alarms to the general public. That was the one. And second one was, I believe, the people's confidence in current Korean government. The Korean government did not put the strict control on people's movement and society in general, but the government provides some instruction like social distancing, and people had kind of confidence in the current government. And this is good for the whole Korean society. This is the way to fight against COVID-19, and they followed the government instruction. So in general, people's confidence in the government. And the third, the economically, South Korea was not that seriously hit. As I showed in the table, the South Korea would perform quite well among the OECD countries, just minus 1.2% economic contraction. And the South Korean, the government did not put strict control on Korean society, strict control on people's movement. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not particularly party goer. I'm not particularly outgoing people, and I don't really enjoy drinking and eating out. But for people like me, except wearing mask, except not going to overseas, and except applying hand sanitizer, the life is normal for me. I still meet friends and still have the seminars with the government people. So things are pretty much normal here in Korea. That is, I believe, South Korea's resilience. I will stop here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. Now the question goes to Professor Priyono to Indonesia. Many questions, but I would like to summarize the question. The first question from Louis from CSEAS. Does Indonesia have a capacity to implement universal basic income while lockdown? Maybe for your information, Louis, Indonesia not have a policy option for lockdown, only partial lockdown. But and then the second question, how the government policy dealing with the economic crisis? Maybe these two questions goes to Pak Priyono, please, Pak Priyono.
Thank you, Pak Risman. Thank you for the questions. How come all questions is about economics? I like the question about the society, actually. Okay. This is very difficult time for us in the economic terms, because if we want to develop, we need the money, and the money usually came from the tax, came from the saving and everything, but we cannot have a tax anymore because of the tourism close, because of the what do you call it, hotels is also doesn't receive the guests, the visitor and everything. So our tax income is going down right now. It's difficult, really difficult time for us in the economic sense. And the last one is because of the international trade also. We, Indonesia, sometimes is depend on the import from other countries for our raw materials. Because of these situations, the import is getting expensive. So we cannot produce our own product and export it because of that one, because the price is increasing. So during this time, when the people have to choose, especially the policymakers, either health or economics, Indonesia choose the economic one. Why? This is why they're relaxing everything in the economics, But I think the result will be worse. Otherwise, we are going to the self-sufficiency economy, But let's see, there is also a brighter side. Because of this pandemic, most of the people learn to become marketer. You know, some of the university professor selling the fruits and everything. I mean, they got the fruit from the rural area, and then they become mediator and selling right then. Some of the university professor asking their wives to make a cake and everything and sell it. So there is a innovation in the family, actually, innovation in the professions. Before we are busy just only with teaching, but no, we are trying to this one. And the second one is about the online marketing, online shopping. It's very good one. Because if you go to the supermarket, if you go by yourselves to the mall, you will buy something which is not needed sometimes because of temptation and everything. But no, because they cannot go everywhere. So they buy the very essential only through the online shopping. That's also become the positive way. People try to do the right things. Yeah, that's Pak Arisman. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Priyono. Now the question goes to Vietnam. This is also my personal curiosity of, actually there's from 3 questions. I can summarize that the question is, what is the secret recipe for Vietnam to have a 0 case? And then what is the really correlation between early containment and economic resilience? Because I mean, this is related to the how Vietnam policy to have a 0 case. So how you explain this here, please? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. First, what is the secret for Vietnam to have, I think, 0 death? You mean 0 death, right? In the first wave?
Yeah, first wave.
I think there are a few reasons. First, in the first wave, Vietnam was successful in containing the number of cases. So, as I mentioned, until April, Vietnam had only more than 300 cases. That means Vietnam was not overwhelmed by a high number of patients, and that means Vietnam can take better care of those who were infected, and that helps to reduce the number of mortality. And in some other countries, you can see that because there are so many patients, there are so many infections, the hospitals didn't have enough beds for patients. They didn't get access to equipment necessary for their treatment. So that makes things worse. In the case of Vietnam, that didn't happen, and we had enough resources to take proper care of all the patients. And secondly, I think another important factor is that most of the patients in Vietnam in this first wave were rather young people, who are quite healthy, and they didn't have many pre-existing conditions that make them more vulnerable to COVID-19. And this is different from the second wave. As I mentioned earlier, in the second wave, so far we have 8 deaths, and most of them are senior people who have serious pre-existing conditions, and this makes them more vulnerable to the disease. So that's the first question. The second question, what's the correlation between early containment of the first wave and Vietnam's economic resilience? Yes, I think there's a strong correlation here, because Vietnam only went through 3 weeks of social distancing or lockdown nationwide, and Vietnam managed to reopen the economy in late April. That means from April to July, Vietnam had 3 months of no community infection, and most economic activities went back to normal, especially domestic tourism. If you read the news, you can see that most airports in Vietnam in May or July or in June and early July went to their full, normal capacity before COVID-19, because many people went on their summer holiday. and most shops, manufacturing facilities were able to reopen and operate as before the COVID-19 crisis. So this is an important factor that helped Vietnam um, avoid, more serious economic consequences. And as I mentioned, now we have to wait, for the second wave to see whether Vietnam can repeat their success again. But again, the important lesson is that if you can focus your efforts on containing the virus as early as possible, then you will stand a much better chance to restore economic activities.
Yeah, thank you here. Now the question for Dipankar. Dipankar, how's India food distribution system being leveraged to keep people at home during lockdown? I think this is also from RSIS. This is related to the food security, India food distribution system. How,
Yes.
yeah, because the lockdown, so you have to deliver the food to, yeah, how the system,
Yeah.
please.
Yes. Well, yes. There are two questions to me. One, of course, on this, and secondly, I think second question from Margaret. Again,
Yeah.
a very substantial question regarding the food security. Now, this is a very major challenge. While in India today, because of its good domestic agricultural production in the past, there are enormous stockpiles available in the godowns. But to have it distributed and reached to the people who need them is a challenge. And of course, in India, we have a ration card which entitles families for a certain amount of rations. And that, of course, has been liberalized, and the government has made those ration distribution to the poorer families free of cost, certain quantities. And these are being made available and based on their respective ration cards. And the government has now made those ration cards, for example, uh, operable throughout the country. So if a migrant was somewhere else working to earn a living and not in his home place, he could draw his rations there and free. So therefore, such innovative measures will have to be devised in order to ensure that ration is actually delivered at the places. Ration stores, of course, exist around the country. So people actually have access to the rations. But lockdown conditions impose problems. Now, Margaret's question, again, a very important question. How to build a regional cooperation under these conditions of the COVID pandemic? Now, unfortunately, the pandemic is not just the only problem of the current era. There are geostrategic problems, geopolitical issues, and climate conditions taking place simultaneously. For example, just the climate questions. Now, much of the assistance, support, etc., in countries like Bangladesh, because of the worst flood in the last about 20, 30 years, seriously impacted. South China, again, some parts of Southeast Asia also, I'm sure. Second, of course, there are other tensions building up. There's a trade war between China and the US, now, which impacts severely on the region. Now, I'm one person who believes that China has a major role to play in addressing these socio-economic conditions of South and Southeast Asia. With its financial capabilities, with its trade and other support, the region needs to cooperate together in able to build those relationships. Now, the RCEP is under discussion, seriously discussion. Of course, India dropped out of it because of the adverse conditions and that its interests, genuine interests, were not being addressed within the RCEP discussion framework. Now, those need to change. Mindsets need to alter in South Asia in particular to making the South Asian Free Trade Area and the BIMSTEC and other mechanisms for cooperation with Southeast Asia in terms of trade, commerce, industry, investment, has to all be opened up. And this is the type of thinking that we have to be following now. And through the processes of this meeting, for example, which brings the NGOs across the board from all countries together, expressing their views, raising questions, suggesting ways, we'll be able to find a way out. And that is where a major mind change will be required to bring about all these changes in order to address the serious question that confronts us in the
Question goes to Prof. Melly related to NTS Asia. Because one of our objective of this webinar actually to want to know more about
very useful, particularly when you look at the different experiences faced by different countries. And you can really see the vast variety. Some countries are less affected and some are deeply and badly affected. But certain things come to the fore. And if you actually step back and see what made, if you talk about the recipe for sort of success in mitigating, if you like,
Yeah.
number one is really the early action, early detection, the decisiveness from which the governments decided to act, whether it is in closing down the borders or ensuring that you activate all putting out all the stops in ensuring that people are actually protected. That takes a lot of guts, because when you close borders, the economic impact can be quite profound, right? But for other reasons also, now we face the question of, okay, having gone through the lockdown for many countries and have to choose between, do we open up now or do we continue to continue with this border controls, the impact of the economy? This is where I think the contribution from the different experiences and the emphasis that many of the speakers have given to trying to, for enhancing regional cooperation. I think from all the presentations this afternoon, there was always the emphasis in, you cannot go backwards. You can only go forward as far as regional cooperation is concerned. And they can come in many forms. And I think this is something, to answer your question, this is something that we could perhaps tease out more. I mean, in what areas do you think, the countries in the region can help? Okay, they talk about integration, keeping markets open, but apart from that, is there something else that we can actually do? Now, one of the focus of this webinar is looking at the experiences and the impact on vulnerable communities, and across the board, whether you are from South Asia, from Northeast Asia, we see commonalities. The impact on women, for example, because now they have to play multiple roles. The burden could be more. The impact on migrant workers specifically, because not only have they lost their jobs, but there's also the problem of trying to get access to whatever information there is, or even assistance, right? The impact on employment, on people that have been displaced, right? And so in trying to see how we can help each other, are there lessons that we can learn, or some policies, for example, that we can think of? Some of them may not necessarily be applicable, but this kind of ideas that we share, this is, I think, where platforms like this, like the NTS Asia Consortium, really help, because it pushes us to think through and to analyze some of these problems and present some ideas, right? And offer these ideas to governments or to NGOs or even to international foundations that all have, in other words, all the different stakeholders in trying to really address a very difficult and increasingly complex problems. I like what Priono has mentioned about, while we think of all these challenges that we have, we also need to examine to what extent can we actually strengthen the social capital part. Right? You talked about social capital, and I think it's something that we perhaps overlook in our concern in trying to sometimes we miss the trees from the forest, so to speak. The other is the emphasis, the point that Dipankar told us about. This is an opportunity for us to do things better, right? People talk about resetting. It's quite difficult to think about resetting something when we are still in the middle of a very confusing and complex situation. But how do we actually reset? When you talk about, oh, this is an opportunity for us to examine some of our practices, some issues that we talk about being more efficient, and at the same time being more inclusive, at the same time being more equitable. These are some of the issues that we, in our own individual capacity, as scholars, as analysts, and those that straddle between policy and policy and academe, and if you're a member of the civil society, these are some of the things that we could sort of bring together. So I would really hope, I don't want to preempt Arisman, but if we can pull these things together, and there's always room for bringing this out, in various shapes and forms, whether your presentations we could all upload, but certainly the exchange of views is really, to me, very, very valuable.
Thank you, Prof. Melly. Yeah, I agree with Prof. Melly that I just read a book by Klaus Schwab, COVID-19, The Great Reset. So yeah, we are ready for the reset because, like mentioned by all speakers, now we're facing we call it, we never happened this before. So how we mitigate, how we deal, how we change our behavior, our work. So I don't want to make a conclusion, but I just take a notes from all speakers. The important issues related to COVID. My note is the first is the impact to all Asian countries is unemployment and poverty. This is the same like other crises, like mentioned, financial crisis, but this one, not only poverty, but as well as the life also changed because we are locked by the COVID. But positively, in the environmental side, many environmentalists have many data. This COVID also have a positive impact. So I also agree with Prof. Melly and Prof. Riono. We have to rethinking and we have to keep positive how we work together and how the strengthening the social capital. This is also important because we never have this kind of problem before. So the social problem, not only the common problem, but this is also, I believe all Asian countries, this is the first time to face this problem. So yeah, the collaboration is the key. Social capital is the key. So even like I heard Indonesia and Philippines, the community doing well compared to the government, because sometimes the government have limited time, budget, but yeah, this is the social capital, we call it, coming from the community base. So yeah, actually, I'm happy to do this until evening, according to the partner. But again, we try to start on time and finish on time, but now already 15 minutes more. Thank you for all the distinguished speakers, Prof. Melly from NTS Asia, RSIS, as well as all the participants coming from different parts of Asia, from Malaysia, India, Singapore, even Indonesia. So I also look at the background. They're coming from different background, diverse background, like government, NGOs, academia, as well as private sector. So it means not only from the academics. So this is very interesting because looks like this issue is very important. It impact to all of the sectors. So I think we have to work together to collaborate for facing this COVID pandemic. Again, thank you. Please give applause for all the speakers and for all of us. I would like to close this webinar. Thank you for all of you. And we deliver the e-certificate. You can register online in the Zoom or YouTube. You can get your e-certificate. Thank you so much again. For
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.